Jerome Powell, U.S. Federal Reserve Chair, is set for a high-stakes appearance before U.S. Congress today as the Federal Reserve weighs how aggressively to keep raising interest rates in the face of stubbornly high inflation. Powell's testimony before the Senate Banking Committee will be the Federal Reserve Chair's first public remarks since troubling inflation data releases showed the central bank is still struggling to cool the U.S. economy despite its year-long campaign of monetary tightening. For more on these headlines, we'll cross over to London. We're joined by Arise business analyst Bode Oshosumi. Good morning, Bode. Thanks for joining us. What do you make of that Germany factory orders data? What are we learning from its release?
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me on the show. German factories, they began the year on a fairly upbeat note. We had a surprise increase in January orders. Factory orders came in today lower than in December, but still slightly upbeat in the sense that they beat a market forecast, 1% month on month in January compared to 0.9% forecasted. But it's followed a upwardly revised 3.4% rise that we saw in December. But the details are quite interesting. Factory orders led the gain. Foreign orders, led the gains, 5.5%. With those from countries outside the euro surging 11.2%. That was led by aircraft and spacecraft construction orders. On the other hand, orders from the euro area actually decreased 2.9%. Domestic orders also sank 5.3%. That's quite a bit. Orders went up for capital goods. That's 8.9% up. Aircraft and spacecraft construction 138.5%. So there's a huge jump there. Manufacture of motor vehicle machines 6.8%. Consumer goods came down 5.5%. Led by the reduction in demand for electrical equipment manufacturing. The orders there came down 22.3%. It's worth noting that domestic orders are down and euro area orders are also down. And what is driving orders are from outside the euro area, mainly aircraft and spacecraft construction. The recovery in leisure and travel is pushing up global demand for new aircraft, and manufacturers in Germany and other parts of the world are benefiting, especially demand coming from emerging economies like India and China. Order for consumer goods is a sign that consumption is still down. Electrical equipment came down 22.3%. Hopefully, lower gas prices will help disposable income in subsequent periods and improve the demand for consumer goods. Still, the manufacturing sector has some grounds for optimism, given the recent improvement in the expectations. The IFO Institute survey that we just had for February was not too bad. And China's reopening is also likely to help sentiment, raising the prospect of more German exports. But also announced today, Germany plans to ban some Chinese components in the country's fifth generation wireless network as geopolitical tensions heighten. My thinking is that with a softening domestic market, Germany will feel the pain if China, for example, retaliates by finding ways to cut down demand for capital goods from targeted nations. So as the world gets more interlinked, one has to be very careful with some of these moves, especially against China.
All right, strikes in the UK, now in France, and we've got opinion polls coming from the French saying that most don't support where Macron is going. What are your thoughts, starting with France?
Well, fuel deliveries and refining, I understand, were actually disrupted at Total Energy and ESSO, the Confédération Générale de Travail, that's the CGT, the main union. They said that shipments were also impacted at both Total and ESSO. So this can, the hit on the economy can quickly climb up. Now people say that the impact is forecasted to be less than 0.2% of GDP, but my sense is that the situation can easily intensify. But indeed, Paris subways, commuter train schedules are severely affected. Labor unions are calling for a surge in the number of people taking part in strikes. Protest marches across the country after participation actually dropped significantly in February from a peak of 1.27 million on January. That was January 31. But Macron is not backing down. He says he needs this minimum retirement age to go up from 62 to 64. It's important to keep public finances sound while funding other priorities such as the green transition. The question is that should people be working more to help fund government priorities like the green transition? Can governments operate on a far leaner purse than they say they have? And of recent, especially with new pressures with COVID, governments have been getting much, much bigger instead of the previous trend of smaller governments. So the answers are anything but obvious. The legislation is being reviewed by the Senate. The goal is for it to come into effect in September. Timing, I think, is another very sensitive issue, which the pain may have been underestimated because the timing now is extremely difficult, and it appears that governments are increasingly out of touch with some of the challenges of the average households, given all the issues, inflation, and so on. But we'll see how this goes on. According to what we heard today, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire, he also unveiled a deal with retailers in which they agreed to take a hit to their margins amounting to hundreds of millions of euros, offering lowest possible prices, all to bring the prices down in a new 3-month campaign to help households. But will that be enough? I doubt. According to the head of CGT, they say they are going into a higher gear this week, and it's still unclear whether the changes will be approved by Parliament by the end of the month, or if the government will have to ram it through using special constitutional powers that he has. But even if Macron is able to push this through, I think it could come at a huge political cost.
All right, China helping Sri Lanka out as it struggles economically. What else do we know about this development?
Well, some have said China contributed to Sri Lanka's problems by pushing many of these huge projects that China was financing, which some said didn't always make sense. But Sri Lanka needs to repay about 6 billion on average each year until 2029, and we'll certainly have to keep engaging with the IMF. It's not clear what the new support that we understood yesterday came from China, but there was a letter which provided some support that is giving the IMF some assurance. China and India are Sri Lanka's biggest lenders. In total, Sri Lanka owed Chinese lenders 7.4 billion, or that's about a fifth of their public external debt by end 2022. And although the Export-Import Bank of China offered Sri Lanka a 2-year moratorium on its debt, I understand that's still not enough to meet IMF conditions. The issue with IMF is that they can only provide support if they see a sustainable debt pattern. And for debt to be, if it's unsustainable, if it's not sustainable, the fund's financing will not proceed except they get adequate assurances. And I think China, being the biggest creditor, has to give assurances that it's going to work in alignment with IMF the IMF protocol. But I think the bottom line is China has become the world's largest government creditor to developing countries over the decade, and it definitely has to have a key role in talks over debt restructuring. Most of that debt has been done by state-owned banks, Chinese banks, who are reluctant to write down loans. But China also needs a business with Asian neighbors, and Asian neighbors needs China, and all these infrastructure projects that China has been pushing, and of course also financing, has helped trade. Take, for example, just today, China reported a solid jump in the trade surplus as imports and exports showed a slump during the January-February period. So China needs trading neighbors to be financially healthy. So there's a win-win here. But Yellen just commented yesterday expressing support of Sri Lanka's steps towards clinching an IMF program in her conversation with President Ranil Wickremesinghe. And she says commitments to transparency and comparable treatment for all bilateral, official and private creditors are all welcome. But let me just close by saying Beijing is also offering a lot of support Pakistan, and they have said that they're going to help a lot of other heavily indebted nations like Zambia and Ghana. And I guess that could also help IMF's concerns. But China is certainly playing a major role, and it calls for a new partnership, especially with these Western multilateral institutions like the IMF, of course, amid a simmering Cold War.
All right, interesting developments there. Rise business analyst Borio Shoshimi, thanks for taking us through the headlines. Appreciate your insights.